Augustine and Nicole is supported through our state underage prevention grant. We have a regional grant with the towns of Needham, the lead agency with Dedham, Walpole, and Westwood. And if you all don't mind, obviously we're recording so that we can share the recording and the workbook, and you can share those with your colleagues. We're committed to this work because the mission of our grant is equity and prevention, and we have 8 guiding principles to ensure that we're looking at data, qualitative and quantitative, and interacting with all residents in our community, representative all groups, ethnicity, race, gender identity, etc. So if you don't mind, you'll probably hear my dog is in the background drinking water. Forgive me, I thought I changed my position today. And if we could just go around briefly, introduce ourselves, and I'll give this over to Nicole. I'll start with Elisa. I'll start and someone can thank you.
Hi, I'm Lisa. I've been working with Carol since December on this grant. I'm the coordinator, and I'm really happy that you all are here, and thank you for coming. Right, Trish.
Great to be here, everybody. Hello, hello. I'm Trish Foster. I have my own firm, Trish Foster Consulting. It's focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and I have had the privilege of working with Carol on numerous projects over the years, and I am collaborating with Nicole on some things. So thank you for having me here.
Awesome. Let's
Karen.
Karen. Yeah.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Karen Mullen. I work in prevention in Needham. I'm here for Karen Shannon. She wasn't able to come today, so I'm jumping in and anxious to hear session 3.
Thanks, Karen. Ellen and Sarah.
Hi, I'm Ellen Worley, and I'm with Needham Youth and Family Services.
And I'm Sarah Shine, also with Youth and Family Services. I apologize, my office is being used, so I'm setting up shop with Ellen.
This is casual. We're all friends. Thank you for joining. Okay, Cindy.
Hi, I'm Cindy Melanson, and I'm working with the Division of Public Health on the accreditation team. And I'm trying to figure out the audio is coming out of my computer, even though I have the headphones in, and I can't figure out how to get it in the headphones for some reason today.
I can relate. Thanks for joining us, Cindy. Monica?
Hi, I'm Monica DeWinter, and I work with Karen and with Carol in the Needham Public Health Division, and I work in substance use prevention for youth. Thank you for having me today.
Great. Julie?
Hi, I'm Julie McCarthy. I am the epidemiologist working with the Needham Public Health Division.
Thank you. And LaTanya?
Hi, everyone. I'm LaTanya, and I work with the Needham team. And if I'm off camera for a few minutes, I was trying to eat my lunch. It's just been one of those days, but I'll be back on after I get a little in, okay?
And eating
LaTanya,
is normal.
thank you for coming.
I always say we've forgotten things like eating is normal. We used to eat in front of each other in live meetings all the time. I don't know what it is about Zoom. It's so interesting, right?
Good point. You're right. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, Nicole, for being here. And as I've said every week, you can find Nicole's bio on page 3 of our workbook. But thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to be here today. I was going to tell you, Cindy, next to mute, there's the little caret button. I don't know if you got your audio figured out, but check there, the little up caret next to the mute button on the bottom left to see if your speaker is selected right, if that helps.
I've selected everything I can. So,
Well,
who knows? It usually works.
who knows? Who knows?
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I am so happy to be here with you all today. I really appreciate you all showing up, being here for this conversation. Our time together today is going to be focused on people and thinking about people capacity, thinking about inclusion, diversity, what it means to work with people. I am going to skip over my bio here because you guys got it in the document. And I want to share just an important new quote. Each time we've met, I've shared a quote around land acknowledgement. And this is just the last one I wanted to share with you. And it says this: when we talk about land, this is part of who we are. It's a mixture of our blood, our past, our current, and our future. We carry our ancestors in us, and they are around us, as you all do. Okay. So the reason I've been doing this at the top of each session is because at the end of last year, I learned about land acknowledgements myself. And in this work, I always like to share anything that I learn. And then I also like to make sure not to be cliche in this work. We have to really push back against check boxes. And so I don't actually ever do a land acknowledgement because that would feel cliche to me. But instead, I always just drop a note about what to think about. So if you, your organizations are considering land acknowledgements, I think they play an important role in thinking about history and thinking about our current, present, and thinking about equity and social justice. And so if this is something you choose to do, I encourage you to do your research, look into it. If you have Native tribes in your community, reach out and talk to them. Because if you're going to do a land acknowledgement, it has to have an intention and purpose around it. And truly, our Native folks have been doing land acknowledgements from the beginning. You know, it's a part of their culture. So I just wanted to share that with you as we kind of think and get this started here. In tradition, I think just about everybody here has been here in every session. So you all know I like to start with centering us around our intention for our time together and our 4 main questions we have. If you have the workbook, it's already in there, but if not, I always tell people grab a piece of paper. You can split it into 4 quadrants, okay? And I'll have 4 questions that we'll process to kind of get us started today. The first thing I like to do, I'm setting my 30-second timer. We're gonna start with just our spiral in the middle, making sure we're all taking deep breaths. It has been quite a day. Today is Wednesday, hump day. And it is the end of the fiscal year too. So there's a lot going on. Just make sure you're taking some good deep breaths as you do this. Okay, so our first question in the top left corner, when you think of inclusion, what comes to mind? When you think of inclusion, what comes to mind? Our next question, the top right corner. What fears do you have about prioritizing diversity? What fears do you have about prioritizing diversity? Our third question, our last 2 are traditional questions to kind of think about, is what do you think is our biggest potential for growth? We're talking about inclusion and diversity and investing in people. What do you think is our biggest potential for growth? All righty. And our last question, what do you hope to learn from today's workshop? What are you hoping to learn or take away from today's workshop? All righty. Okay. So hopefully everyone's had a moment to kind of just think about the intention for our time together. I have 3 primary objectives. I know for sure we will get through the first 2. The third one, I'm not so sure just because of our time together. However, the content is in your packet. So if we don't get to cover it, I'll send some stuff to Elisa to share with you all afterwards. But here are our goals. I want to kind of think about bias and how it impacts our work. We'll have a little bit of self-reflection in this space. And we'll talk a bit about the system of racial inequity, how that contributes to bias, implicit bias, what that is, what is privilege and oppression, and things like that. And then at the very end, we'll talk a little bit about how do we think about inclusion? What is our way forward? What are some ways you all can begin to brainstorm on ideas and innovation that can be used in your own departments and in your own work? Okay. So let's get started on the first one and really kind of exploring culture and bias here. And I have a set of 4 questions that we'll answer. And the way we'll do this is I'll have each of you, I'll just go back a second so I can explain first. Everybody will answer 4 questions. Okay, you'll answer them individually, and then we will have a small group discussion. I think we might be small enough to, and I'll give you all a choice here. Typically what I do is I put you all in small groups, and we can discuss this out loud as a group, but yeah, okay, we do have breakout rooms. So we might do small groups of just like 2 or 3. But ideally what will happen is after you answer the 4 questions, you then will either share a response to one of the questions, or you can just share a reflection on what was it like to answer these questions, whichever version feels most comfortable for you. So everyone who has your workbook, you can answer these inside the workbook. If not, just get a new piece of paper, and I'll have you answer these first 2 questions first, which is to think about your name. Does your name have a meaning or a story? And then to think about how you identify racially, ethnically, or culturally. And so I'll give about a minute or so for each of us to gather our thoughts on these questions here, because I want to make sure people have had a moment to think about them, because you'll be sharing some of these responses. And if you're still working on those 2, that's fine. I'll go ahead and show you the next 2 questions for those of you who are ready to answer those 2. The next one is, the first time I noticed racial difference was, and just reflect on that experience and when that happened to you. And then I want you to think about, what is the current landscape of your world? If you think about your work, your home, your social life, whom are you typically associating with? And this is kind of think about the racial landscape. What do those 3 spaces look like? Are they the same? Are they different? And I'll give another minute or so for folks to collect their thoughts on these questions, and then we'll move into discussion. All righty. So here's what we're going to do. We are going to do the breakout rooms. We'll just do 10 minutes. So it'll be about 3 people in each room. That way you can have an intimate conversation. And here's your options. Okay. You can either share one of the 4 responses, whichever one you feel comfortable. Or like I said, instead of sharing a response, feel free to just reflect on what it was like to answer these 4 questions. And if you had any aha moments or reflection there, okay? So we'll just do a 10-minute discussion, okay? I'll set a timer here. I'll do a broadcast and call you guys back in about 10 minutes, okay? All righty. Your request should be coming to you right now. Okay, cool. All right, so I think you and I it's you and I. We can talk. Oh, okay, you're muted still. So let me just take note of the time. So I'll bring people back at 1:29. Okay, so that way I'll give 10 minutes. Okay,
Perfect.
cool. So any one of these pop out for you? Or what would you like to share?
Yeah, I was thinking about differences in like my communities and like who I hang out with, who I spend a lot of time with, like back home versus like in Boston, where I've just been living for 2 years now, which I thought was interesting. I hadn't really thought about that before.
And how the 2 spaces look different. Yeah,
They look different, and maybe that impacts it. But yeah, I thought that was interesting to reflect on.
Yeah, you know, for me, I think about the first time I noticed racial differences. So like you, I had a move. Mine happened in about 5th grade. It was from Inglewood, California to Edmond, Oklahoma. And so I went from a very diverse community to all white, like 98% white. And so that's what I would say when I first really noticed racial differences. Now, interestingly, I was the type of kid who leaned into it. It was a lot of fun. I could make up stories about my hair and stuff, and the kids would believe me, and I'd get a kick out of it, you know, stuff like that I did. But it was very interesting growing up in that kind of environment where, you know, I was the only Black person in my neighborhood, you know, one of a few in my school or in classrooms and things like that. And so it was interesting because people were nice to me, you know. I don't remember experiencing racism, but what I do remember experiencing is this unspoken rule. So like there was you could be friends, but there was a line crossed with dating, for instance. Okay. Things like that just happened that you didn't know why, but it happened, you know? That was one of the most profound things I used to think about. Like if I ever dated, I always had to date from kids at my church, not at my school, you know? Things like that. So it's just interesting, you know, to grow up in that kind of environment. So
yeah, and I feel like very similarly, you know, I grew up in Utah, which is also, you know, very white, obviously in general. very Mormon. But it's like you find your group, like, you know, I'm actually in Utah right now visiting home.
Okay.
And, you know, pretty much all of my friends that I, my really good friends from college are people of color. And
Mhm.
all of the friends that I seem to have made in Boston are not. And so I was thinking that's kind of interesting. It's kind of like we found our group in college, almost maybe like because we felt like we had to, or we kind of pushed together maybe.
Mhm.
But I didn't necessarily experience that in grad school in Boston, which is interesting.
Yeah. Where did you go what state were you in college?
Utah, the University of Utah.
Oh, so you were still in Utah. Okay.
Mhm.
Yes, I see. Interesting.
Yeah,
Wow. Okay. And I wonder if some of that, you know, your graduate experience, I'm assuming Boston was diverse.
right.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah, definitely more so.
More so than the place in Utah.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Huh.
Mhm.
Yeah. Because, you know, I'm thinking about the work, school, and social too, right? Like,
Mhm.
what are the racial landscapes? I know for me, you know, work is mostly white, home is Black, and I would say social is mostly Black. And when I was
Mm.
thinking about it, I was like, you know, of the few white people I do have as friends, it's because of work.
Mm. Mhm.
You know what I mean? I'm like,
Right.
oh my gosh, you know, I didn't even think about how insulated I am racially too, you
Mhm.
know? So we really, I think we naturally kind of segregate more
Definitely.
so than people really think and consider, I believe, you
Which is
know?
interesting. Yeah. And I was
Yeah.
thinking that too, like the friends that I've made since moving, um, yeah, it's because of like professionally, like through grad school, being in the same classes.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I was thinking about all the layers there, like the sort of, you know, privilege you have in being able to like go to grad school and attain a grad degree and things like that, and kind of how that plays a role. Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's
It's
interesting.
so true. Yeah, it's interesting stuff. Yeah, and you know, I think I'm curious, like what people are thinking about and talking about in the
Mhm.
groups, you know, because I know, you know, none of the towns are like very, very diverse. There's diversity there. However, I would imagine quite a few of these folks, the racial landscape is pretty homogenous, you
Mhm.
know. So it's interesting to kind of think about how do you create a spirit of inclusion. You know, how do you create that spirit of inclusion? I was reminded just now as I was thinking is when Carol shared with us the experience of a neighbor, you know, um, even though this person had been living in the community for a while, but because they're a community person of color, of not necessarily feeling included, not feeling explicitly discriminated against, but also not feeling included either, you know? So it's interesting to kind of think about how, you know, even in the spirit of us saying, hey, you know, we're an open-minded community, we're this, we're that, like, does that really translate to folks who look different than the majority feeling actually included in a community, you know?
Mhm.
So I think about things like that. But I think the basis of all of this is having each of us having our own personal reflection on this work. So it's interesting stuff to think about. Does your name mean anything?
No, it doesn't.
No?
It's just like a
Oh,
family name. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Very cool.
A lot of
Yeah.
people ask me that. I think it's kind of funny. I
Yeah.
guess I would wonder too,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
no.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, some parents think very deeply about how they name their kids. Others, it's like, it's the name we've always had, our
Right.
family and our tradition, you know.
That's kind of what I think happened with me. So love to.
Oh,
Traditions are good.
okay, I'm just sending the 2-minute warning to folks right now. So that we'll be bringing them back together here shortly. But I'll be very curious. We'll do a short debrief on this here, but it'd be interesting to hear what people thought of or came up with and thinking about these 4 questions here.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, and just having that reflection. I think some of us don't realize how insulated we are,
Right.
you know, and the connection that I make here as we move into this next section of talking about biases, the unconscious bias stuff lives in the part of our brain where you have to create intention to access it. You know, so if you're just moving through life regular, you don't even realize the biases you have. Because they're unconscious. That's what makes them what they are. They're unconscious, you know? And so I think it first starts with people having this kind of reflection on who I am, what's my landscape, what's been my experience with race in the past, so that you can begin to uncover the spaces where you might have some bias that you didn't even know about, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, like I never thought about like my difference. Maybe it's just because I'm home, but yeah, the differences in like my communities and like these 2 places that I've lived, which I think is interesting too.
Yeah, totally. Okay, well, folks should be popping back in here in about 20 seconds. This is good. People are talking. They didn't immediately jump back in, so that's a good thing.
Letting the timer run. We love to see it.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. We'll wait for folks. And worst case scenario, we can find another opportunity to continue the conversation, you know? Okay, welcome back. Welcome back. I know, I'm sure it felt like not enough time. Welcome back. Okay, so I want to take just a few minutes to do a bit of a kind of large group debrief, just to see if anyone had any thoughts or reflections from the activity, any aha moments or things you want to share in this larger room together.
Yes.
Go
ahead, Lita.
Yeah, go right ahead.
No, who was speaking? You go first.
I was going to refer to you. You were
Y'all were
literally
thinking alike.
speaking and we cut off her. I would love to hear. Well, anyways, my group was Latanya, Julie, myself, and we were just about to hear racially how she identifies, and it was like she was about to say it, and then we were cut off. So
And then got cut off.
I did feel like I'd love to hear it, maybe, if you don't mind.
No, that's fine. I was going to say our group, I guess we got so chatty that good conversation. We didn't get a chance to finish everything. So I was just about to identify how I racially, and I just said I'm Black. And ethnically, I put a Black African American.
Okay. Thank you for that.
And then culturally, I just went back to my family from Bermuda. I still connect to that.
Oh, okay. That's awesome. Very cool. Any other thoughts folks wanted to share? Oh, sure. Sorry, I thought you were done. Go ahead.
I was done with the question from my group that I didn't get a chance to meet, but I was just about to say the reflection was really, it was really gave you a lot to think about, because it was like you had to go back to your your school days, high school, and then how you articulate as an adult and how that intertwines all together. For my group, I think it was agreed upon that the first time we noticed differences was in school.
Yeah.
And I talked about my experience in high school, in elementary school, where I was slapped by a white teacher. That kind of was traumatic and still is. The only reason why I still remember it because my parents sued the school system. So it's that kind of stands out. And then the childhood nursery rhymes were very, racial during the time, and we used to play them all the time. And it wasn't till I got older that I was able to associate the nursery rhymes and pull out the racism in the nursery rhymes.
Yeah, that's so profound. You're having me think about so many things here, because when you take these moments to reflect, and I'm looking at the diversity of age in this room, and depending on your age, like the schooling experience, the young person experience you had is dramatically different from what it looks like today. And so it's interesting to reflect, because there'll be times I'll hear folks, especially if you have people of color in a space, where they themselves may remember a time of either being a part of desegregation happening. I've also heard stories of folks who themselves had students who were bussed in, and just thinking about like how dramatic our society has changed when we talk about these concepts of people and capacity and race and bias. I never thought about the nursery rhymes, but you're right. I look sometimes at the old cartoons and I'm like, oh my God, So it's a part of our consciousness, which I think having the moments to reflect on this, you all, is so powerful for really understanding why unconscious and implicit bias exists in the first place, So go ahead. Yeah, I see your hand. Carol?
I just wondered, and can you give us just your quick 2-second unconscious and implicit bias, your definition?
You're talking to me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So for me, the quick version of the definition, these are belief systems that live in the part of our brain that we don't always have direct access to. That's the best way I can describe it. Unconscious is the things that just happen. So like if your foot was itching right now, you might lean and scratch to just scratch it. You know what I mean? Things that we do just naturally. When you think of unconscious bias, it is like buried in our system to where you don't have to give much thought for it to happen. Other more stark examples are things like when you see a Black man, you cross the street, you lock your car door. If somebody is homeless, right, and you're coming up to an intersection, all of these little things we do sometimes that just automatically happen without you having to sit and think like, oh, I'm scared, that's why I'm doing this. It's not even that conscious. It just is a gut reaction. That's how I think about it. Trish, I'd welcome your thoughts here. Yeah.
So whenever I teach this, I give people a chance to like give their own definition, right? Because there's so many. Nicole gave fantastic textbook definitions that are so important for you to hear. And sometimes what I do is then I add, and if you walk away today and you have trouble pulling up that beautiful definition, can you remember blind spots? I think that's like a term that a lot of us can remember. Like we all are carrying blind spots in our perceptions, right? So unconscious bias is wrapped up in those blind spots that we all have, and we need to learn how to interrupt the blind spots. And then the other thing, I wish it were my quote, is Vernier Myers, who's a powerhouse in the diversity and inclusion world. I love her quote, which is, unconscious bias is the stories we make up about people before we know who they are.
Ooh, yes, I love that.
Yeah.
That's a perfect definition. That's
the one that I feel like connects the cognitive to the heart for me.
Yeah. How many of you are familiar with the implicit bias test by Harvard? Okay, so some of you are. Okay, great. There is an implicit bias test. Harvard's been doing a lot of research on this topic of looking at unconscious and implicit bias. And so if you're interested, I always encourage folks to Google it. It's very, very simple to find. At this point, it's very popular. And to take the test for yourself. I've taken it many times. I do this work a lot. I am still biased. You know what I mean? And I sometimes I get frustrated because I was like, I know I'm working on this, you know? And so I think it's important for people, I share that because sometimes people will look at folks who do this DI work and assume you're without bias, which is not the truth at all. If anything, I think when I first started doing this work, I probably became more biased, if I would be very honest with you all. Because as you start to learn some things and uncover some things, you're like, oh my gosh. So to me, it requires a lot of work and intention to not make those snap judgments that we make about people just upon seeing them, which is a part of what happens with this work. So very, very good. This is interesting stuff.
Thank you. Well,
Go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, I just wanted to say that in our group and myself, I come to this work realizing that I have work to do, and who I am as a white woman. I walk through the world with privilege of education, and it's my own obligation that I've realized I have to teach myself, you know, through different methods. And it's hard in some ways for me because I worry about saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing. And I just have to remind myself that if we can continue to have these discussions and just be candid and communicate that you're trying, you know, we're trying. And it's easy to fast forward in my world of public health and this work and do things business as usual. But in my heart, although it's work, like you said, to strengthen the muscle, to let people know this is important to us. As you know, I lead a 4-town grant, and that we're committed to engaging people of diverse backgrounds and, you know, all different demographics, but and how their stories interact and impact, you know, social determinants of health and our work. So I don't always get it right, and I just shared that in the group.
Well, Carol, I appreciate your vulnerability in stepping into that and saying that. I appreciate that. LaTanya, I see your hand.
I was going to say, Carol, no one always gets it right. Even like Nicole said, the biases are there. I think being true to yourself is definitely a key strength that everyone holds, and mistakes are going to be made. And I feel we learn from our mistakes. I feel, you know, asking questions if you're not sure is always a way of learning. I still ask questions because I want to make sure I'm not offending anyone, or what something means to me may mean something different to someone else. So it's definitely work in progress. I work on myself all the time. And I, you know, always challenge myself, well, are you feeling this way because of that? And especially the triggers for me are the media stuff that really plays hard on my heart emotionally. I'm a care bear. The school shootings affect me so dearly. The shootings in Buffalo affected me. So I just say you're not alone.
Yeah, I totally agree. You know, I'm just thinking here out loud with you all is some of the thing I see with these conversations is, I guess I want to take a moment to acknowledge the fact that the community is somewhat homogenous. And I think sometimes there can be challenges when you're mostly white. How do we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion? And some of it, I think, is because there's this mindset that diversity, equity, inclusion only applies when people have different melanin tones in their skin. And it's important to recognize that diversity, equity, inclusion is much larger than that. But that even when we are talking about skin tone and things like that, that people who are white have work to do in this work too, okay? Because it is the color differences and all of us together is how we got to where we are today. So I always tell and encourage folks that even if you're in a community that has, like, let's say you only have 2 or 3% people of color, you still should be talking about this. Because I think about the quote at the top, we are our history, you all. Our ancestors literally live in our blood, in our consciousness. If you think about what you learned and what you know, you learned it from a parent who learned it from a grandparent who learned it from a grandparent, right? So I think, to me, I think some of the broader questions and concepts we have here is really unearthing some of this stuff that unfortunately creates some trauma, and figure out how do we move to a place of healing with this, and what are all of our roles in that. So I really have appreciated these conversations. Yeah, Trish.
And I know, I try to control myself because I don't want to hold you all up and make you lose time. And I have goosebumps all over me, and I have for like the last 10 minutes since we started this conversation. I think it's getting so real. And this is what we need to do. And Nicole, I just really want to acknowledge that everything you just said has been on my mind all throughout this session so far. And I wanted to thank you for naming it, but also acknowledge really importantly that from what I can tell, and I could be wrong, and I love everybody to share, I think there are only 2 people of color on this in this room, and I could really be wrong on that. So keep me honest. But like you are carrying that and communicating this to a bunch of mostly white people. And thank you for that. I'm recognizing that you're carrying that burden. So I'm not going to apologize because you're also the facilitator, and that's part of your job today, but, right? But
yeah.
I know you know what I'm trying to say. I hope you do. And thank you. And I'm really, really concerned about centering our whiteness as we explore this. But I know there's not enough time to get into that topic.
I know.
Well,
listen, Carol promises to bring us back.
Yeah.
We're going to, because ideally you all, if you think about it, there's a lot to talk about and to unpack just on this. Right. I mean, we barely scratched the surface, here. So I appreciate what you're pointing out, Trish. I really do. I really do. So I want to share one other thing before we kind of be moving towards our closing here, is the talk around privilege, because I consider it the other side of the coin, right? There is privilege. We all have it. The fact that we are all in this room, no matter what our skin tones are, we all got privilege because we have the opportunity to even be doing work from home, to be having internet, to be employed. There's like all these ways in which we each individually express privilege. And so I want to show just a short little video to you all. It's by BuzzFeed. They have if you've never heard of BuzzFeed, I think they do an amazing job, but they have a short video that does a privilege walk. If you've never done one yourself, I encourage you to look into it. Even consider hosting a privilege walk and doing a debrief around it. It can be a really powerful experience for helping people understand the ways in which they are actually already experiencing privilege and may not be aware of it. I think it also creates some knowledge around equity issues that can happen in communities too. So I'm going to share this with you and just get a sense from you all what you think, something to ponder on.
Some people are born into families where they have to walk miles just to get water. All I have to do is turn on a faucet. That's privilege.
If you have ever tried to change your speech, if you were embarrassed about your clothes or house, if you would never think twice about calling the police or in trouble with them.
I think privilege is when some people have some things and other people don't have things.
I feel privilege is something that you don't even really have control over.
I think it'd be silly for me to say I don't have a fair amount of privilege, considering like the country I live in and the job I get to do and the college I was allowed to go to.
I suppose being a white male will help me end up somewhere towards the front, but I'll take a few steps back from being gay.
I don't think I'll make it to the front. I think I'll maybe be in the middle. That's just the gut feeling I have.
If your parents work nights and weekends to support your family, take one step back. If you can show affection for your romantic partner in public without fear of ridicule or violence, take one step forward. If you were embarrassed about your clothes or house while growing up, take one step back. If you have ever been diagnosed as having a physical or mental illness or disability, take one step back. If you have ever been bullied or made fun of based on something you can't change, take one step back. If you get time off for your religious holidays, take one step forward. If you came from a supportive family environment, if you can see a doctor whenever you feel the need, if you are able to move through the world without fear of sexual assault, if you took out loans for your education, if there were more than 50 books in your house growing up. So these are your final positions.
I think it felt kind of strange for everyone.
It's a hard thing to discuss or even reflect on. It was very awkward.
I think when you can represent it so visually like this and so immediately, it definitely takes on a new form.
I think we were like all joking around in the beginning. It was pretty lighthearted, and as soon as the questions started coming in, the mood shifted immediately, and we all it was just silent.
Just looking back and seeing like a bunch of people behind you is not a good feeling.
It's like weird how you want to like hold on to explaining a certain privilege, like, oh, but that's not actually me because like I had to work really hard for that. So it's weird to like take a step forward when you feel like you're taking a step forward with someone else, but you wear a lot of the baggage of like how those things were hard.
It was like more emotional than I thought it would be.
It reminded me of when they talk about slavery in high school and you feel like angry for a few days, but then you just realize like, this is how it is.
For me, it was kind of frustrating almost to look back and see how much further some people were behind me, and realizing that, you know, a lot of that stuff, no amount of hard work or even legislation can make up that gap.
It's interesting being an Asian American because you're not really sure where you fall on the spectrum of privilege.
I know that for me, one of the reasons I ended up so far back was that there are questions around safety as an African American, as a woman, as a gay woman. There are just so many different ways that I don't feel safe.
I feel like I just learned to be grateful for what you have. You know, we're in such a huge society where it's always complaining about what you don't have.
It just shows you that for some families, like each family, you're meant to do better. My grandparents did good, my parents did good, and I'll do even better.
I do think if you're not like aware of privilege, you should do this exercise, but it's more complicated.
Okay. So I don't know if anybody had ever seen that before from BuzzFeed, but it is a powerful video. It does an excellent job in a short amount of time of really sharing and packing in a lot. What I want to share with you all just as a last resource here is this wheel of oppression and privilege, because I think it does a great job of thinking about all the ways in which we experience privilege that we may not be aware of. So in your handout, this is in there. There's actually a second one that's blank for you to have an opportunity to think about for yourself, where are the places where you experience power, where are the places you experience privilege, and where are the spaces in life where you may be experiencing oppression yourself, okay? Because I think everybody experiences a bit of both. This particular graphic I personally really like. It shares and talks about some of the things that we as a society have placed in the center. I would love to see a time and space where we start breaking that up and that the things that are here in this middle are no longer the things that are considered the top of the food chain in our American society, you know? But I'd like to open up the floor for any thoughts or comments here in the space. I want to give a moment for that. a bit of debrief or thoughts from folks.
Can I go ahead? I just wanted to say thank you to everyone that's participating. It's definitely hard work, and I appreciate the willness and the effort from, the health department. And I felt so comfortable sharing with my group. And I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for listening. I don't have all the answers, but if there's anything you want to ask me, please feel free to know you can definitely reach out. If I don't have the answers, I will try to, find them. And I can only speak for my experience and share what I have. So you please feel free to. That's how we're all going to get through this together.
That's true. Thank you for that, LaTanya. Chrissy, I believe I heard you speaking.
I mean, I don't think there's enough time to necessarily discuss it, but I've seen stuff like that wheel before. And while I think it's definitely interesting, I'm kind of I think I'm sort of skeptical of the idea that we can sort of neatly plot out almost like there's a mathematical equation of what where we stand in society. And I think it's helpful as a beginners, not beginners, sorry, that sounds like it's disparaging it, but it's helpful when you're starting out thinking of these things. But I think that especially with intersectionality, it's you're gonna have a different experience being a Black gay man than you are being a white gay man, and that might not neatly fit with where it said that it was straight, and then gay men were in the middle for some reason, and then lesbian women were had it the worst. So I guess I would my personal opinion is I think that they're interesting tools for thought, but to me, I think what can be limiting is if people start thinking of the model as now we can calculate where someone stands, if that makes sense.
I definitely agree with you, and it totally makes sense. Thank you for mentioning that. I appreciate that. Trish, you had a thought you wanted to share.
Yeah, Chrissy, thank you. I agree. What came to mind right away for me is when you see that the wheel, that diagram, you go, whoa, we all have so many identities. So hopefully the takeaway is the opposite of what your concerns are. That would be my hope, that people would go, wow, right? Never judge anybody by one identity. Everybody lives by multiple identities. And by the way, and when you start, I know we're moving fast, but if everybody can spend some time living with that diagram after this program, because it's such a wonderful one that Nicole shared, you start pondering your own, and then you start pondering other people's, and you go, wow, a lot of the identities that most impact people's lived experiences aren't even visible.
Right.
Everybody's carrying something, right? And if you approach every human interaction you have with this knowledge that person you're talking to today is carrying something, and you have no idea what it is, that can be a game changer in this diversity and inclusion work.
Yes, I love that. Most of what we carry is invisible. I love that. That's beautifully said. Beautifully said. Well, you all, Carol, yes.
I just wanted to say that I appreciate having the opportunity. This is really, Chrissy works in Dedham Public Health, but this is, a Needham turned out to be, and I consider Chrissy a Needham gal because we all work together so frequently. And the fact that we have the same role, I'd like to see more of these conversations. And I've had the opportunity to work with LaTanya for almost 15 years. She's the director of our Council on Aging, but she also was our town social worker for adults forever. Sarah, who works in, directing our youth supports. And there's so little opportunity for these conversations among service providers just at the baseline, and how we can help each other do better in our work and our outreach to make sure that we are including talking with, getting the perspective of the diverse, underrepresented, minority represented populations in our towns. So I would like to do more of this. And what I'd like to do is reach out to you all who have participated and see what your thoughts are for us putting something like this, going forward. So I just want to say, I appreciate the opportunity to, of course, have Nicole, and thank you for joining us, Trish, but also all of you, because I feel to do our work in public health and prevention, we need more of this, strengthening the muscle and learning about these structures that impact how we can do our work.
I totally agree. Well, I was going to say, you guys have been awesome to work with. I've appreciated each week you all have come to have great conversation. And I do look forward to talking with you all more in the near future. So I appreciate everybody's time today.
Does anyone have anything they want to share? Because we have a minute or two, please feel free.
I just want to say thank you.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
And what Elisa and I, with Nicole's help, will put the 3 recordings together, the 3 workbooks. Please feel free to share the recordings and the workbooks, far and wide, with your colleagues. And like I said, we this is an ongoing process, and we're grateful to be able to have Nicole in our contract, and we'll regroup and offer more opportunities like this. Did everyone think the lunch, it was lunch and learn 1 hour? Did people think that was a good choice to carve out your time?
Okay.
We're learning
Playing with the bite-sized, meetings.
Right. Okay, people nodded. Okay, I'll be respectful of everyone's time, and thank you again. I'll stay on Nicole and Elisa and Trish.